Hey guys, it's Steve here from CG Geek with another Blender tutorial. This one on creating a beautiful night sky full of stars. So this is a really fun tutorial, and it's a useful tutorial because you can use it pretty much in any scene and change it from a daytime scene to a nighttime scene. For example, you could use any of the tutorials I have on creating an environment like the snowy mountain tutorial, or maybe the ocean tutorial. That would be cool. Or even just something like I did here with some trees, and again you could follow the tree tutorial I have for something like that. But it's a really fun tutorial on creating a starry night sky. And the cool thing about it is everything is done within Blender. You don't need any third-party, tools or textures or anything else. It's all done straight inside Blender. So let's just do it. Alright, so to start off, we don't need this cube, so delete it. We don't need that lamp either. Delete that as well. And what I'm going to do is add a big half a sphere here as our world to hold our stars. So I'm going to go Shift A and add in a UV sphere. We can add a little bit more detail to this. So I'm going to go Control 2, and that will put a subdivision surface modifier on it with a view of 2 on it. Cool. And now let's scale this up real big. Something like 15 should do the trick. Alright, now go in front view, hit 5 on your keyboard, you go to orthographic view, hit tab, and let's just delete the bottom half of these vertices. So select those, X, delete, and one more time because we have this option on. You can turn that off and avoid doing it twice, which I'll do. But there we go. We have a half a world, well actually more like 5/8 of a world, but we're going to use this to hold our stars. So let's make it smooth shading, and let's create a star. So the star will be just an icosphere because it's a little lower poly, and we don't need as many vertices because they're very teeny little stars. So just add in an icosphere and scale it down a bit, and that right there can be your star. We'll make it smooth shading, and let's give it a material. Now to get into the materials, I'm going to use Cycles Render, and I'm going to enable an add-on, and that add-on is Node Wrangler. So Node Wrangler is something you want because it is awesome and super powerful, and you want to check it on. So go to add-ons, turn that on, and you'll be happy that I told you to do that. Okay, so once you've enabled that add-on in the user preferences there, you can close that window off and you're good to go. So what I'm going to do now is add the material in for the star. So I'm just going to split my window here and open up my node editor. Dun, dun, dun. And here we can go to materials, add a new material. You can do it here or you can do it down here. Just click new material, and we can give this star our material. So this star is going to be an emission shader because stars emit light. So we're going to change it from a diffuse, just delete that with X, and add in an emission shader right there. And we can connect these two. And because I want to, I'm going to start using the Node Wrangler features, and that is one of them. Just hold Control, right click, and it connects it for you. Instead of having to grab the little teeny buttons, you can just use Control, slide, and it connects it for you. Awesome. And it speeds up the workflow. And that's all about what we're about. We're about getting things done quickly. So with that done, we can go ahead and add in our next node, which is going to be a color ramp. So converter, color ramp. And this is going to be the intensity of the stars. So hold on. I have a subsurf on this icosphere. Turn off the subsurf. I somehow added a subsurf on that. You don't want no subsurf on your stars. Go ahead and go color and use this in the strength. So this is going to be the strength of the stars. And I'm going to change it from linear to consistent. And basically now I can tweak the variety of stars in the variety of brightnesses. Basically, if you look up at the stars at night, you'll see there's a few of them that really stand out that are bright. But then if you look carefully, you'll see like just millions of them, but a lot of them aren't quite as bright as just those few that stand out. So this is going to be how I choose which ones are brighter and which ones are darker. So with consistent on, I can use different values here to just tell it how much I want of this and how much I want of that. So I'm going to give this about that much 100% white stars. Then I'll hit Control, drop in another little lever there, make this a bit brighter, like so. Drop Control in there, make this one a little bit darker than that last one. Oh, gotta go darker, like so. Maybe brighten this one up just a little bit there. And then hit Control, drop one in there, and give this one a little more than black. And then we don't want any full black, so make that one just a little bit brighter too. Alright, now these are kind of close. Maybe brighten this one up a little bit. So you have kind of a spectrum of different colors here that you can choose from. And we're not going to choose from them, we're going to have it randomly choose from these. So I'm going to go Shift A, add input, object info, grab that little random node there, so handy, and drop it into the factor value. Now you'll see if I go to rendered view here, we have a blank little star here, and if I duplicate it, we have a different color one. If I duplicate again, we have a different colored one. And you can see it randomly chooses which one it's going to be every time I duplicate it. That's how it's going to do it with the particle system. So I might want a few more brighter stars because it seems like they're just kind of too many dark. So to add another bar in there and give yourself some more light stars. Really easy. Alright, so with that done, the last thing I want to do in this material is give it a little color variation. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but sometimes when you look up at the stars or just look up at different images of stars, you'll see the stars sometimes look a little bit different in color, and it's just cool to give them a little color variation. So I'm going to drop in another color ramp here. This time I'm just going to take the first color, I'll leave it white, and then I'll give it in the last color a slight blue hint. Nothing too major, but like a slight blue hint there, and then I'll drop one more in the middle and give it just a slight red hue. So we have this sort of color variation that we might get throughout the different stars. And if I drop the color into the color there, and then add in another random node here, object info right there, connect it up, and I'm sorry, I need to do it the right proper way, which is holding control and right clicking, because it's so much cooler. Alright, so now with that done, we go rendered, we have a blue star, we have a light blue star, we have a dark star, dark star, dark star. I want to get a red star in here. Doesn't seem like it wants to be red. How come I'm not getting much red in there? Huh, it's weird, I'm not getting any red. Maybe we need to increase the amount of red chances. So let's go ahead and do that again. Whoops, I undid this. Connect that back up. And let's just give ourselves a little bit more red. Maybe do something like that and just give ourselves a little more red just to make sure it's working. I don't like that I'm not getting no red in there. Huh, still not getting no red. What is... Oh, I'm sorry, I have it object index and not random. There we go. Now we're getting too much red, so I can go ahead and delete that. That is how you do the color though. So go ahead and Command Z all those duplicates, and then yeah, make sure the random is the one connected to the factor there. And we don't need that little handle. Awesome. So some people like it that I leave little things in there like that, and I show you how I solve little issues that I have. Other people might get frustrated by it. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to teach you guys how to fix issues that you might find along the way. So I hope it's helpful to leave things in there like that. But you can see now it's working. We get some red and some blue. So really cool. Alright, so let's distribute these across our big sphere here. So I'll go ahead and select that sphere and go particle system, new particle system. Alright, now we want it to be hair, and we want it to be advanced, and you can see all these hair strands are pointing outward. What I'm going to do is I want them to point inward, so let me quick split my window here so I can have the 3D view here non-rendered, and I'm going to go tab and then go N to my properties tab here, click that normals face there, and you can see the normals are all facing outwards. I'm going to point them inwards. So just select them all, go to your options here. Let me just show you here. You have your shading and UVs, and under normals you want to flip the direction. Perfect. Now if you tab into edit mode or out of edit mode, you see that they're pointing inward, and that's how I want it. Alright, so now I can go ahead and add in that star, and it will be called icosphere because I was too lazy to name it. So I'm going to go render an object right here and choose icosphere. Cool, and now we have those stars up in the sky looking sweet. If I hit 5 and then kind of jump inside here like so, I can set my camera to be in here. And I want my camera to be pretty much in the center. So I'm just going to go Shift S, cursor to center, grab my camera, Shift S, selection to cursor. And then if I hit 0, I'll go to my camera here, and I can kind of pivot it upwards to look at the starry skies. Now what's cool for this scene is if your camera has a wider depth of field, or focal length I should say, not depth of field, focal length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my camera settings here and change it from 35 down to about 16. So you get more stars in your scene there, and it just looks better. Alright, so everything's working good, just need to change those star settings a bit. So turn off the emitter. We don't want the emitter rendering, we just want the stars in the sky, so make sure you uncheck emitter in your render settings there, and the size is obviously way too big. So crank the size down, give it some random size, and give it a whole lot more stars. So we're going to give it another 0 to that number. And you can see your stars showing up nicely there. And now on top of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable children. Now children is basically, just like it sounds, a children of that star. So for every star out there, it's going to give it children. So I'm going to choose simple there, and you see it just drops a ton more stars in there. And basically they copy the information of the main particle that's already there, so they render a bit faster, and that's the benefit of using them. So let me just take the render value number down to about 20, and this is the display number you'll see. And I'm just going to take the roundness right here and pull that up so it really shoots them out. It's kind of hard to see it with it being rendered, so I'm just going to take that out of rendered view. And you can see it here, we have all these little packets of stars, and taking the roundness value up spreads those out a bit, and it just helps. And the radius too, the radius is another one that shoots them out like that. So turn the radius and the roundness up a bit, and you'll get them distributed much more evenly. Cool. Whoops, there we go. And there's my desktop if you're wondering. Okay, and I'm going to take the size down just a little bit too on these children's stars, so we'll go down to about a 0.9 there. Alrighty, so now we are ready to be done with the stars. I think that's pretty much it for our starry sky. It looks very cool. Possibly too big, but those can be tweaked later if we need to. Always change the size of them. That looks great though. So with that done, let's set up the environment. So the world color, and that's going to be in our world settings here. We want to choose use nodes, and for the color we want it to be a sky texture. So just choose that little box there and then go sky texture, and you see you have your sky texture there. Let's go into our node editor here, and right here you can see it's already set to material nodes. This is compositing nodes, and this right here is the world nodes. So I want the world nodes, so I'm going to click that little box there. I have my world settings here, and what I want to do is I want to add in some color variation to this. So if I go rendered right now, you see it's kind of bright and too bright. So I'm going to take the strength down to start to about a 0.4. I'm going to drop a hue saturation value in there. Drop that in there, and then we can take the value down a little bit more in the sky on top of that. And maybe you just want to do some things like give it more saturation or less saturation depending on what you want, etc. So this is looking pretty good. I'm just going to drop one more node in here, and that's going to be the Rgb Curves. So Shift A, Rgb Curves, and we'll just take the color down even more. Something like that is going to about do it. Now I just want to position my camera so I don't see the floor of the world here. I'm just going to hit double tap R when I'm selecting it. Here I gotta jump back to my star layer. You can see the stars rendering there. I'm just gonna hit double tap R and pivot that upwards so I don't have that the floor in it, and it's just the sky basically. Alright, there we go. It's looking pretty good. Excellent. So if you find your viewport running kind of sluggish because of all these stars in your scene, what you can do is with that children setting, that's another reason it's nice to use children, is because you can turn them off. So you can take the display on the children down to just 1, and it won't show any of them, but it will still render them. So now you can see your viewport runs a lot smoother, and you'll just get work done faster. So do that, and as long as it's at 1 and this is at 20, you'll still get them rendering. Awesome. Alright, so now it's time to do a little bit more to the scene and add in some clouds for some nice little variation in the sky. So to do this, I'm going to use a new layer because I'm going to render it out in separate render layers so we have a whole lot more control later on. So go ahead and go to layer 2, and let's add in a cloud. Well, a cloud is going to be made of 2D textures, and we're just going to kind of layer them in the sky, and it will look good for something like this. So I'm going to add in a plane. Let me go to top view here, hit 5 on my number pad, and I'm going to scale that plane up and scale along the X. This is kind of a long shaped cloud right there for now. Alright, maybe too much in the X, something like that. And let's just give that a subdivision. Well, no, let's first divide it. So I'm going to go into tab into edit mode, hit W, and subdivide. And I'll do that a few times to give myself some vertices there to work with. Alright, now I'll give it a little bit of shape too by grabbing that center vertice hitting O to turn on my proportional editing right here, and pulling it downward, and then scrolling my wheel on my mouse to kind of curve that up more. If you don't have a mouse wheel, a little tip for you is if you're grabbing it, you can go Control plus or Alt plus and Alt minus on your keyboard to change the size. Alright, so there we go, and now we have that done. I'm going to choose Smooth Shading in my tools here under Object Mode, and then I'm going to add a little bit of displacement to this texture. So that's just going to be a modifier. First I'll add a subdivision surface modifier, and then on top of that I'll add a displacement modifier right there. Once you've done that, you're going to go New Texture, and you won't see anything happening yet because you got to go to your Texture tab. You got to change it from Sky Texture over to Displacement Texture. And now that you're there, you'll see a Set to Image and Movie, and that's not what we want. We want a cloud texture. So we'll choose Clouds, and there you go. You get some cloud shapes coming across there. That will work fine, just those default settings. Maybe just make it slightly smaller shaped clouds, but that will be fine. Then go back to your modifier settings, and we can take the strength way down because that is just too crazy cloudy. Alright, something like that's looking pretty good. I'd say it's maybe a little strong, but there we go. You can tweak it as much as you want, maybe halfway back, go 1.5 or 0.15, and there you go. So now let's stick this cloud up in the sky and work on our materials. Okay, so there's our cloud up in the sky. If I go rendered, you'll see it's just a blank nothing. So switching back to our material nodes here, or object nodes there, choose that little box there, choose new material, and we don't need diffuse again because these are going to be emitting, otherwise they won't show up. And they also kind of emit light when the stars hit them. They shine up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a shader, Emission Shader. Connect that up, and you get that blank old piece of plane. So go ahead and add in a texture, noise texture. And what we're going to want right away with that is a converter color ramp. So go Shift A, converter color ramp, and connect that up to that. Alright, now if we click on that with Control Shift, and we have our Node Wrangler add-on like we did earlier, we can see a little preview of what that's going to look like. And it's not looking too bad, but there might be just a little bit too much curvature in this. So maybe just pull that back a little bit, just so it's not too crazy curved. Alright, now I'm going to kind of tweak these settings to have the white set portions of it be the clouds and the black portions be where I don't want any clouds. So just kind of tweaking this, and now I'm going to change the size and scale. The scale will be something like 21, maybe 18, something like that. And then I'm going to crank the detail up to something like 8. So we get some more detail, maybe even more. Maybe I'll go all the way up to 16. 16 is the max. And so you get some nice little detail on those clouds. And let's kind of tone that black off a little bit. Alright, something like that isn't looking too bad. Now the distortion is something that you can use a little bit of to kind of give yourself some cool wavy clouds. You can't go too much because it starts looking weird, but a little bit of that is helpful. Alright, so now one thing left to do, well, maybe a few things left to do, but is we don't want these sharp edges. We want the clouds to kind of fade in and fade out. So how I'm going to do that is with another texture. I'm going to go Shift A, add in texture, and this is going to be a gradient texture. So use the gradient texture and change it to spherical, and add in the color ramp. We'll just duplicate this one to make it easy. Connect those up, holding Control and right click because that's the way I'm doing it now. And do it again, and I guess it's still have to do it because it connected the factors. I guess it doesn't really matter. Factor would probably work too. But I'm going to go select that, and you can see I get that sphere coming on the side of my my plane there, and I need to move that to be more centralized. So what I have to do is normally I would go add in a texture coordinate and add in a mapping node, but to speed things up with that Node Wrangler on, I'm just going to go Control T and it will add both those in. A lot of you guys told me to do that in the comments when I was using Node Wrangler, and I listened to you. It's awesome. Do it. It's helpful. So now I'm just going to kind of tweak the location here. In the negative values, I'll go -4, and that kind of centralizes it a little bit better. Now I might have to tweak some of these locations to centerize it even more. So turn that up a little bit there, and then turn it down a little bit in size there using that value there. So just kind of work with these settings until you have it centralized and it's a nice orb in the sky. Something like that isn't bad. And now let's take this gradient map here, and you can kind of change the scale of it with this too, and make it something nice and fadey. So I'm going to change it from linear to ease. Ease is sometimes just a little bit more fadey, and something like that. Awesome. So what I'm going to do to connect the two of these now is just a simple color mix multiply. So change it to multiply, and multiply this on the bottom socket, and then this one in the top socket. So you have, when you turn the factor to 1, you have the clouds right there, fading in and fading out. The size might be a little bit big still. I might make those just a little bit bigger there, changing that to 16. And awesome. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make this be the color of the emission shader. Okay, now you might think, well, I still got that black chunk sitting there. What am I going to do about that? Well, what I'm going to do is add in a mix shader. So, Shift A, add in a shader, transparent shader. Where is it? Right here. And then to connect the two of these, I'm just going to hold Alt, right click, drag between them, and Node Wrangler does it for me. Super awesome, didn't I tell you? It's awesome. And now for the factor here, it's just going to be, boom, this multiply now. So I'll hold Control and right click, and we connect the factor up to that. So now when I look at this, you should see, well, these two values need to be switched there. Voila! We have, let me just move this around so it's a little bit more organized, some clouds appearing in the sky. So very cool and very easy to do. Now you can kind of tweak your cloud settings, make it more or less intense, etc. But that looks pretty good right there. Maybe turn the distortion down just a little bit. You know, animating this distortion could give you some cool moving clouds too. So that's something to keep in mind. If you wanted to animate the scene, you could go ahead and hit I and add keyframes right into here. So that's a cool method if you want to animate your clouds. Alright, so something like that is looking pretty decent for the cloud layer. I might just scale that up a little bit, and there you go. So what I'm going to do is take these clouds. You can change the strength of them with the emission value here. So turn it down maybe a little bit. Go into camera view here. Well, actually, I'm already in camera view here, but so that will work fine. I can just kind of look at it from this view and move them around in this view. I'm going to duplicate these and just mix them up a little bit. Give them some layers like I was talking about. So go ahead and Shift D, move them around, scale them, rotate them along the Z. Just kind of keep them looking like similar, but off in the distance maybe a little bit more. And then what you can do is go to your materials, hit that little checkbox to make it its own material, and then you can tweak the settings and even change the way they look and the scale of them and everything else. So that's cool, and that's a good way to give them some variation. So I'm going to go ahead and do more of that, just kind of layering up in the sky here, moving these around. Maybe pulling them back and then scaling them up bigger, and just giving us some variation in the clouds. I think my main texture here might be a little strong still. Maybe turn that down a little bit. That's looking pretty cool. Maybe just do one more now, and we can kind of pull it down as a lower hanging cloud right in here. Maybe I'll just kind of rotate that though. Give it a little bit of a different rotation there. All of these might be good if they're rotated just a little bit towards the camera. I'm just grabbing them and hitting R twice to kind of pivot them. Alright, there we go. And that's looking like some pretty sweet clouds. Pretty satisfied with those. Maybe just turn down the amount of this one a tad more. But everything else is looking pretty sweet. So there's our layers of clouds, and that's ready to render. So we have our clouds and we have our stars. Now if you were going to add something like an environment or some trees to these, you could go ahead and add them on another layer. I don't know if I'm going to bother with that in this tutorial though, because this is basically just on creating a starry sky, and I have tutorials on adding trees and mountains and everything else, so you could do that on your own. So let's go ahead and get into the compositing and finishing up with this scene. So to do that, I'm going to go to my render layers. Now render layers are super powerful and super fun, and as soon as you understand them, you can't stop using them. So render layers, I'm going to use two of them, so just hit that plus there, and the first layer will be called stars, and the second layer we can call clouds. Now to choose, to set it up to use the stars and the clouds, I'm just going to say stars are going to be this layer here because they are on layer 1, and then choose clouds, and you can see right now everything is selected. I want it to just be that layer there. Now I don't want either of these to use the environment, so choose uncheck use environment in both of them, and then add in one more final render layer node, and that will be the environment. I'll just leave that as env for environment, and leave environment checked, and then check like the third layer there, which is just a blank scene, which will just render out the sky. So cool, those are the 3 main nodes you need for the starry sky. Once you've done that, you should be able to render. So I'm just going to quickly create a render here. Give it about 100 samples. That's about a minimum when you're doing the stars. And yeah, go ahead and hit F12 and render it out. You'll see over here it renders out pretty fast. And hold on, I'm sorry, I didn't select those layers. If you don't select them, they're not going to render. So you just want to hold shift down and click on the layers that you want rendered. And then you can go ahead and go F12 to render. You can see here that it's already looking pretty cool though, just in our little preview scene there. And you see your stars rendering out. They look very awesome. You see some of those dimmer stars and some of those brighter stars. Maybe too many stars. It could possibly be too many stars. But some people might argue there can never be too many stars. So we can work with it. And we can always tone them down in the compositor or boost them up. So there we go, render out the stars, and then we're rendering out the clouds. This might take just a little longer, so I'll pause the recording and jump back once it's finished. Alright, and I'm back, and you can see the environment render layer is just finishing up right there, and we're ready to go. So, to start, I'm just going to switch to my compositing nodes. And let's just give ourselves a little bit more room to work here. Close this tab off with N, and choose Use Nodes, and Backdrop. There we go, and we have our star layer here. So we'll start with the stars, and I'll just go Control Shift so we can see what those stars are looking like. Crazy. It looks like a universe of crazy stars. They might be a little bit big, so you can always turn the size down a little bit on those particles. Just crank them, where are we? Size. Just crank those down to about a 0.12, but I can still work with them for now, and I might just do a final render layer later. So let's duplicate our render layers and give ourselves the environment render layer. There we go. And if I Control Shift that, you can see it's just that blank gradient environment. So let's start by giving our stars some glows, because stars glow at night. It's one of the coolest things about them. So to do that, I'm just going to go Shift A, add in a filter, blur. I'm going to choose Fast Gaussian and drop in the first, just drop it in. There you go. And let's see what, well, I guess I can't see what it's looking like because it's plugged into the sides. There we go. Give it some blur. This is just going to be a slight blur to start though. So I'll go 2, and then I'll duplicate this blur and do it one more time and give it a wider blur. Alright, so we'll give this one like a 8 or so. Pretty good. Look at that. You can see it's a wider glow, maybe even 9. Alright, now I'll add in a color mix, and I'll change it to add. And I'll add these 2 glows together. So we have, there we go. We double the glow, which is always cool. And then I'm going to duplicate this add node one more time, and we'll add these glows on top of the stars. And there you go. You see we got those crazy glows on our scene. You can tone down the amount of glows though if it's too much by taking the factor value down. But another thing is, I think I have too many stars emitting too bright of light. So what you can do is jump back to your default render layer here, grab your star. It might be easy to find it up here. It's the icosphere. Go to your node editor, and then just crank back the amount of bright stars by doing something like that. So you might want to do that, and I think I actually will. And if you want to just re-render one of these layers without having to re-render all 3 of them, you can just click that little checkbox on the star layer, and you can see it renders out just this star layer, which ends up ultimately saving you a whole lot of time. So there we go. This looks like a better starry sky with a little smaller stars and a little fewer super bright stars. So this should look a little bit better and give us a little better results. So that's rendering pretty fast, and because we don't have to render the clouds out, it will render very fast. So there we go, and we're ready to roll with the new stars. Alright, so now I can crank this strength back up to 1, because now you can see it's not just making the whole scene bright, but just a few of them, and then some of them are still dim, and it's looking pretty awesome. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and add these stars to our environment. So I'm going to go color mix, change it to add, drop it in the bottom, and drop the environment in the top. Alright, check that out. Control Shift click it. There you go. You get your environment behind the stars, and it's looking pretty sweet. Now, if you wanted to change the way the environment looked a little bit, we could drop a filter color balance. Color balance node right there. Color balance. And you can give it just a little bit of a deeper blue color. Something like that is pretty cool. And change the brightness and darkness and everything else if you wanted. So that's looking pretty good. And now one thing I want to do is, I do it in pretty much every one of my scenes, go to the color management, change it to film. You can see that darkens everything up a little bit, but then I crank the exposure back up to 1 and it adds some of that brightness back into the scene. And now I can kind of change the scene here by tweaking the colors and making that a little bit brighter back there. It just adds a little bit more filmic look to it and exposure, and I like the looks of it. So there's our stars, looking pretty nice. Now what I want to do is I want to add in those clouds. So I'm going to go Shift A, add in input, render layers, and we got one more render layer to use, and that's our clouds. Let's check what that looks like. You can see it looks pretty decent. So to start off, I'm just going to duplicate that that mix shader there, drop the clouds in the bottom, and you can see we have the clouds coming in the scene. Not too bad, but something doesn't look right. And you guessed it, what doesn't look right is the fact that the clouds, let me see what that's like. Okay, it doesn't make a difference which direction it's flooded. The clouds aren't really covering up any of the stars, and clouds normally kind of cover up the stars a bit. So what I'm going to do to fix that is pretty simple. I'm going to take this texture here, add in a color ramp, converter color ramp, right there, drop this into the factor, and then go to it. Now I'm going to flip it right there, and you see it looks like it's pure white after I flip the gradient there. But if I take the blacks and pull it all the way up, right up close, you can see we have detail in the clouds there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, pull it up really close, 0.005, something like that, and then I can use this as the factor, and you see that those areas where it was black, I'm not really seeing it actually. Maybe I need to invert this. I think the white is going to show the stars and the black isn't. I think I need to change this to mix actually. There we go. And now I need to invert it, I believe. Or we could just flip these inputs, which should do the same effect. There we go. We can see that in those areas we aren't getting the stars. Now the issue is I have my nodes set up a little wonky right now. I don't want this to be here. I want this to be here. I'm getting just a step ahead of myself. So this one's going to go to the stars being added to the environment. And then this node is just going to be a basic add to add in our clouds. So there we go. Just fix that there, and now you're ready to roll. And basically you can see here that with this node we're just kind of cutting away the stars where these clouds are supposed to be, and that's awesome. I might make that even more harsh. If I change that to ease, I might get a little bit better gradient again, and maybe I'll change that position just to be even a little tighter there, just because we kind of want to cut those stars back. There we go, it's looking pretty good. And then let's give that a little bit more of a gradient by dropping in a blur node. So filter blur, drop her in right there, change it to fast Gaussian. We'll just go relative along the Y and do it by 5s. And then we'll see that it kind of fades it out. That's fading it too much. Let's drop it down to 1. Whoops, both of them 1. There we go. And now I can make this even more small just to really pop those blacks out. Awesome. And what's this looking like? Well, we get that. And it's looking pretty decent. Maybe just a little bit more blur now. But it's looking pretty cool. So the clouds are kind of hiding or covering up some of the the stars now, and it's looking pretty good. Maybe just turn down the amount of blur a little bit. I think it's just a little harsh. Let me see what it's looking like after it's blurred. Yeah, that's pretty decent. Maybe 1.5, just because it's better than 1. Alright. Now the clouds seem a little dark, so I could drop in a color balance node on the clouds. Color balance. And tweak the clouds a little bit. I want to tweak these clouds, so drop it in there. Awesome. Let's just kind of boost the highlights a little bit. Make them a little brighter, boost the mids. Kind of pull those clouds out. They're a little dark in there. There we go, that's looking good. And now we can see what it looks like. There you go, it's looking pretty sweet. Maybe too bright. But that's the power of render layers. When you have the render layers, you can tweak the settings without having to re-render the whole thing, because you can tweak just parts of it. Now if I use this for the factor, I think that will cut back more of those stars, and that's what I want. So go ahead and use this in the color ramp, and it'll cut back even more of those stars, and then I can crank the blur up a little bit more to let some more of those stars back in. Maybe I'll even go up to 3. There we go. So that's looking pretty sweet. Now I might turn down the amount that those clouds are added in, but you can see it's looking very cool. This might be still a little harsh. Maybe I'll move the position just back a little bit there. There we go, and you can see we're back in business. Things are looking pretty fancy. So that is essentially the combination of the 3 layers. Now there's just a few tricks that we can do to make this look even cooler. One of them is adding some color variation to the sky. So sometimes when you take a picture of the sky, even if you don't see those colors, you'll get some red or some blue or something cool coming in the background. And that's what I'm going to add in here. So to do that, I'm going to drop in a color and filter, and I'm going to choose glare. There we go. And I'm going to change it from streaks over to ghosts. So drop that into the image on ghosts and check it. So right now it doesn't look like much. I want to change the mix to be 100%, and then I have to just take the threshold way down, 0.001, and you see you get some of that. Some kind of glare coming off those clouds. I'm going to change the color modulation to be up a bit more, so you get some color in there. I'm going to take the leterations up a bit too, so it's brighter like that. And that's not bad. We're kind of ready to work with that. So this is something that I can just add in to my environment to add some variation to the scene. And it's kind of working off the clouds as well, so we get some interesting kind of looks to this glare node. So I'm just going to add a color mix, drop it in there, change it to add, and we can add this glare to the environment. So you see the environment now looks like that. Obviously that's way too strong. We're just going to go like a 0.12, just a subtle little bit of color popping into the scene there. And now when you look at the final image, you'll see that the little bit of glare doesn't show up too much, but it adds quite a bit of variation to it. So if you crank it up a little bit more, you'll get even more kind of popping color. And then we might want to tweak the amount of clouds by turning that down a little bit. And it's looking pretty nice. So the last thing we want to do is a few more glows and glares. Just they kind of add to the scene, giving a little star effect. That's funny, star effect to the stars. You get it? Of course you get it. I'm going to go alliterations to 5, leave it at streaks being 4, and then just turn the threshold down until we start seeing those streaks kind of come in on some of these stars. There we go. Something like that. Giving a little bit of an angle to it. Change this to 45. That looks pretty cool. Some streaks on those stars, and they're just kind of popping a little bit more in places. Maybe even too bright. If they're too bright, you can kind of turn down the amount of glow over here, or maybe just make the glow a little bit bigger so it's less harsh. But it's looking pretty good. The brighter stars are kind of popping out even more, and maybe just take the threshold up a little bit so they're not all quite popping. Just some of them are. Alright, that's good. Just a tad more. And then some color modulation is always nice as well, to add some color to the scene and to the glares. There we go. And with that color changed, you don't see it as much, so you might want to give it just a little bit more. And that's looking pretty decent. Now, last but not least is one more glare node, and that's going to be the ghosts over the whole scene, so we can have some ghosts created from star effects and whatnot. It just looks cool, so I'll just show you. So to give ourselves more control, I like to do the switching the mix to 1 and then adding in a color mix node, changing it to add, and adding it back in to the bottom socket there. It's basically the same thing as a mix here, except it has more control over how intense it is, and then I can tweak the colors of it too in a separate node if I wanted to. So go into this now, let's see what that glare is looking like. I mean, I'm sorry, not glare, but ghosts. So really nothing yet, and that's just because we need to drop our threshold to a low value. I'm gonna go 0.01. Oops, that's not point, that's point. There we go. Let's see what that's looking like. Ooh, it's pretty cool. Nice, you get the star effects creating some cool glare, and I like it. So crank up the color modulation maybe just a little bit more. And if you did something like I did in my scene, adding a moon, then you'd have some glare coming like across the scene this ways, and it just looks pretty nice. So I'm going to turn this down, 0.2 something, and you get that effect. Subtle, but it adds to it. Gives it more of a center point to the scene. Now, if you'd like a tutorial on how I created that moon, feel free to shoot me a comment saying, hey Steve, make a tutorial of that moon. It's just a procedural texture node, and it was kind of node setup. It was all done in Blender, and it was kind of fun. So if you really wanted that, I would do that for you guys. But that is going to do it. I might just tweak my background environment here a little bit. Give it just a little bit more blue hue, just to kind of pop it a little bit more. Ooh, there we go. That's pretty sweet. And then you could drop a color balance on your final starry sky layer and just kind of tweak the highlights and shadows and anything that you might think is too much. And the highlights might be a little much, so I might just take the highlights down over here a little bit and boost the mids a little bit then with this here. Let's see what that gives us. Alright, that looks pretty decent. And you can give just a little color change in here too. Maybe make the highlights a little red and then the mids slightly blue. Something like that. And we'll see what that adds to it. Just a little bit of variation to the scene might help. So there we go. It's not really noticeable, but it's there. So that is it, guys. That is our starry night sky with some procedural clouds and everything in place. It looks pretty sweet, I think. I like it. These stars might be popping just a little bit too much, and that's just going to be, we need to turn the amount of glow down on it. So you can always come back, turn the amount of glow down. And if you wanted to turn that glow down and add just a bit of overall glow, you could do that too by dropping in one more glare node over here. Let's just add it in here actually, and just give it a streaks. We'll give it fog glow, just a little foggy glow, and see what that does. And there we go. It doesn't look too bad. Take the threshold down a bit to maybe 0.1. See what that looks like. The nodes start moving just a little bit slower once you have that many, but that's kind of a nice subtle glow to the scene, and I like it. So there we go, guys. That is our finished starry sky. That environment might be a little bit bright there, and then just connect to your final node, to your composite layer there, and you're ready to save it out. So shift space to make it full screen, and I'll just zoom in on it a little bit with Alt V. That is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and had fun creating a night sky in Blender. It's a fun little tutorial I found. Well, I had fun making it. I don't know if you had fun, but if you had fun, let me know in the comments, guys, and show me your results. So thanks for watching, and thanks for learning, and I'll see you guys all later. Bye-bye.